Hello, everybody. This is the second time we've tried to record this because I forgot we were doing a video podcast. So my previous version was audio, but we are introducing this episode. Cora is laughing, as you can see, just distracting me. We're introducing this episode as one that's slightly different to our normal episode. Cora, why is it different, please?
It is different because we're recording it live at the EdSci Festival in front of just over 300 audience members. What you're not going to be able to see in the video is that these audience members were live in the chat like a Twitch stream, and they were like chatting away, being very connected to us. We felt so while you see us, there are in the audience 300 people all talking about what we're doing and interacting with us, and it was a really wonderful day.
It was great to see the chat, wasn't it? Like, and be able to respond to that live and see how people were reacting, and very scary to be doing that live in front of so many people, but a really nice opportunity to have an exciting and interesting conversation.
I thought so too. Like, it's I don't think I've done live episodes of the podcast before, but I've never done it in conversation with someone. And I will say that if I ever suggested this to anyone, like, let's do a live podcast episode, I don't know anyone other than you who would say yes with such enthusiasm. You were in a heartbeat, like, let's do this.
Let's do this.
Let's freaking do this.
Let's do this. Yeah, we really hope you enjoy it. Hello and welcome to the Educated Guest podcast with me, Dr. Dan O'Hare.
And me, Dr. Cora Sargeant.
Where two educational psychologists reveal how little they really know.
Each episode will discuss and reflect on topics or issues in education, psychology, or society, puzzling our way through and no doubt demonstrating just what we don't know.
But along the way, we will welcome some educated guests who can shed light on some of the complexities of the topics and issues we focus on. So welcome to the Educated Guest podcast.
Hello. Dan. So good to see you. How are you?
Good, thank you. Where are you, please?
I am currently in my living room. Wait, my dining room. My living room and my dining room are basically the same room. It's important that people know.
And where are you virtually?
Right now, I'm on stage at the EdSci Festival, headlining a festival. I've been telling everyone I can possibly find that I'm headlining a festival, and then they imagine that I'm at Glastonbury, and I just leave them with that impression.
Why not?
And for me, I was always like, oh, it's more humble than that. And then I come and I hear Kerry, and I've heard Bernard's talk from this afternoon already, and I realized just what a incredibly enormous honor and incredibly humbling opportunity it is to be here. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Absolutely. It's an absolute honor and a privilege to have you here. And I'm so up for the fact that we're doing a bit of a live recording here. And I'm so up for like the attendee like interaction as well. I feel like, you're a podcast like guru, and I'm just an absolute rookie. So I'm nervous, and I'm like, oh my God, people are here. We're doing this, but I'm going to rely on you to calm my nerves.
Hey, Dan, look at that microphone. You are no longer a podcast rookie with that mic. That's the mic of a podcast pro right there. For sure. It's been a great event so far. Like, genuinely, congratulations. I'm sure folks in the chat will join me in congratulating you on what has been so far an extraordinary event. And I think the chat is where it's at. You guys are where it's at, because the speakers have been incredible all day. I've been jumping in and out of sessions because I kind of wanted to see everyone. I knew I couldn't, but I know we've got some recorded content I'll be able to see later.
Yeah.
But it's you all in there. I see your messages. We all see each other's messages. We are one community, and it's so wonderful to get to be part of it.
Absolutely. And for those watching, like, this is, as Cora said, this is about you and interacting with us. And I just think it will make the episode really great. We got loads of great comments. Louise listened just last night to episode 1 of The Educated Guest and absolutely loved it. So there you go. Some feedback right there. Lots of people have just subscribed. So this is actually just a marketing ploy. That's what this is.
That's it. This is the end. That's all we're doing.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Head to YouTube. You can find us.
Pretty much.
Or on Spotify. Hey, whatever.
Yeah, video and audio. So we'll see how that works with this recorded episode. But we think it will work fine. Yeah, definitely.
It'll work fine.
So
It'll work fine.
give us an overview of where we're going to go this afternoon in the next half an hour.
So I'm going to be the educated guest today, incredibly, talking about gender. The podcast is about education policy and practice and society more broadly. We talked about climate, and we talked about the future of education. We talked about the challenges of the white paper that is moments away from coming out about SEND reform. And we don't generally talk about gender, but it is relevant right now in education because we're a moment away from both the EHRC for international listeners. That's our human rights watchdog in the UK. Um, they have written a statutory code of practice about gender diverse people and where which groups and societies, which bathrooms they can use, which place they go to if they're in a single sex ward in hospital, and all of that is in a statutory code of practice which interprets the law and has some legal bearing, and that is winged its way to Parliament. Um, and there's now a question about whether it will even be debated before it comes into force. And the UK government is about a month away, I reckon, maybe a little longer, from releasing its gender questioning schools guidance. Um, the title of which tells you a little bit about its contents, because we know from the massive amount of literature, but not least from Jack Turban's work, that most trans adults were trans children. Most gender diverse adults were gender diverse children. But the government, in using the phrase gender questioning, is trying to avoid describing trans and gender
Mm,
diverse children, young people. Um, and if you think that might be a form of kind of on the edge of erasure, you might be right. And so right now, we're in a situation where the medical system is woefully unable to meet the needs of this community. Children, young people waiting for transition related healthcare are waiting 3 years for first appointment right now. Adults are waiting 6 to 8 years. And that is like, if were referred in 6 to 8 years ago, you're being seen first appointment now. If you're referred in today, it's likely to be 20 years before you're going to be seen, because the amount of people that are being
wow.
referred in exceeds the amount of new appointments being offered. So right now, children and young people looking at this country in particular, but around the world really, wondering what their future is like. And educational psychologists will no doubt, psychologists generally, educators more broadly, and just people who are good people in society will no doubt need to look after a marginalized community
Mm,
who don't easily see a future for themselves.
yeah. Can I take you back to language? Because when you talked about the gender question in schools guidance, I think one of the things that grabbed my attention there was language. And I guess maybe this is like, am I asking you to do an explainer? Maybe. Thinking about, I guess there's a whole range of terms that are out there, but like you indicated, might be used specifically in some context for a particular reason. And the sorts of terms and language that I'm thinking about are helping us to get to grips with the difference between uh, gender non-conforming, gender questioning, non-binary, gender diverse, trans. You talked about the gender questioning schools guidance, and I guess from my perspective, I would see a gender questioning young person as as different, having a different set of issues and experiences to a young person who is gender diverse. They're two different sort of experiences, but yeah, tell us a bit more about like all the different terms we see, and are they all the same, or actually are there differences here?
Yeah, really tricky, because there's so many terms that we could spend the whole session talking about and trying to define all the different terms. There are two places, maybe three places, that we can go to get a good primer. One of them is an article that we have written. Dan and I and a couple of our extraordinary colleagues have joined us in writing an article, which is a kind of professional primer. It's currently being considered at peer review. Fingers crossed that will be published. When that gets published, we'll let you all know, and you'll be able to find out everything, all the kind of baseline stuff around the science you might need to know. The second place is from this author here, Sean Fay. This is a signed copy of Love in Exile. which Dan managed to get signed for me, which is one of the nicest gifts anyone's ever given me. And immediately I was like, "Can we do a podcast together? Can we be best friends?" Um, Sean Fay did a book, wrote a book called The Transgender Issue, which talks about the history and language and science and is just extraordinarily well written, as is everything Sean Fay writes. A really good place to go. The other place is Classroom Psychology, which is my podcast. 49 episodes. 49th episode is going to be on the worst ever research that's ever been done on the trans community, and it's pretty heartbreaking. So look forward to it, if that's the phrase. Um, but those are all good places to go to get a sense of the depths of the language. But the language we need to focus on to make sense of it. How do you spell the author? Sean Fay. I'll leave it up on screen for a moment. Um, Sean Fay, Shonfaye. Um, she'd written a blog post yesterday, which is absolutely beautiful. So there's three aspects of gender that's useful for us to hold in mind: biological configuration, gender identity, and gender expression, as three separate ideas. Biological configuration, how your body is configured in relation to gendered anatomy, like your primary and secondary sexual characteristics, how your body is shaped, the hormones running through it, your chromosomes all fall into that category. And then gender identity, Mindville, I think, in 2012 said the only thing that's consistent within any given gender identity, such as man or woman, amongst others, is a deep seated sense of identification with the concept. The term rings true, it holds meaning. Something inside of us says, yes, that's right. That feels like home. That's what I am. That feels like home. That's what I am. And then gender expression is how you perform your gender to yourself and to the world. So your mannerisms, your clothes, your makeup, your voice, right? How you express yourself um, to yourself and to the world is a social invitation. And that social invitation carries meaning in terms of how we invite people to relate to us. And so when we talk about anything to do with gender, we might be talking about multiple of these or just one of those. So when we say, a young person is gender non-conforming, generally we're speaking about gender expression, how we present ourselves to the world and to ourselves. It doesn't necessarily mean there's anything um, like it's not reflective necessarily of somebody's gender identity, because somebody's gender identity is personal to them. Only you can know how you identify on the inside. So when we talk about trans, it's kind of an umbrella term that is akin to gender diversity, which is a more modern term, I think, which covers everything. That says actually gender within each of these categories is quite diverse and is more a tapestry, a rich and beautiful tapestry, than it is a kind of binary in any one of those categories. So people can be anywhere along a kind of spectrum, nowhere at all, in multiple places, in any configuration, and all of those are valid ways of existing in the world. That's gender diversity in the main.
Wow. Wow. Okay. I mean,
Is that okay?
yeah, I feel like could you get a clearer like description of that? No, probably not. That really makes sense. Okay. I understand that. And as you were talking, I was kind of thinking about it in relation to my own, for example, gender identity, gender expression. Yeah. And I guess the way that you talked about the various ways that there's not like a one doesn't equal this, which equals this. One might have a gender identity, but express themselves in different ways, which is not, in a sense, contradictory to one's gender identity.
You are so right. That I think people can sometimes get surprised by the idea that there are trans women in the world, people who identify as women in the world, but who might have been assigned male at birth in the world, who express themselves in masculine ways because they have a gender expression. They like to express themselves as any other woman, sometimes in more masculine ways, as there are trans guys who express themselves in more feminine ways. And the reason that that's possible is because of that configuration can be quite, any configuration is valid. You can
Mhm.
identify as a man and still present yourself in fairly feminine ways. Though it is less common, doesn't mean it's impossible or that
Mm.
people who do are any less valid.
Okay, so having listened to what you said and how you described it, maybe this is a tongue-in-cheek question, but I'm sat here and I'm thinking like, do you have a view about why this is such a thing? Now, I've got a view, but I'd be really interested to hear about what your view is. Why, it feels like, and at the start of the day, I introduced the day and I talked about the increasingly hostile environment towards trans and gender diverse people and young people, and we see that through, the festival charity partner is AKT, and 50% of the,
Oh,
sorry, for the listener, that AKT is the LGBTQ plus youth homelessness charity. 50% of the young people they support are trans or non-binary. That is trans, non-binary, or gender diverse. That is a massive, massive overrepresentation within a context of, as I said this morning, an increasingly hostile environment. So my question is, like, why is this such a thing?
yeah, I think that's supported by the international literature too. I was looking at some studies out of Brazil that were finding much the same thing, that trans people, particularly trans women, and particularly trans women who are more visibly trans, are more likely to experience homelessness in the world, probably because they're more exposed to marginalization. I think the reason, uh, I think, is I think what we need to bear in mind is that if you're anything like me, dear listener, you might conclude, because of the way in which we've been raised, that England is a progressive country, right? We're a progressive country. We lead the world in equal rights, in civil rights. We try to kind of um, we try to make a world where everyone can find a place to belong. And like the Gender Recognition Act of 2004, which gave trans people legal recognition, was a hallmark of that, right? But if you look at our history, you realize that the Gender Recognition Act was kind of forced upon us because we lost two cases at the European Court of Human Rights. And before that, Britain, we went around the world and colonized countries. And Enza Han, one of my favorite authors, Hannah O'Mahony, looked at countries around the world with anti-homosexuality laws on the books, which captured kind of gender diverse people as well, because trans women were seen as men under that law. And they were trying to predict which countries had such a law on the basis of whether they had been former European colonies. And they found that they could, and that former British colonies were most likely to have these colonial era laws on the books. So this year is an incredible year because in 2018, India repealed its anti homosexuality law, which was a colonial era law, 388. And this year, a high court in India declared that transgender women are women in Indian law. In the same year, within a couple of months of the Supreme Court in the UK saying transgender women aren't women under the Equality Act in the UK. And while that might appear like a departure from what we might consider typical, a departure from form for the UK, my argument is that it's more a return to it. And that India's act, that high court saying transgender women are women in India, is an act of decolonizing gender in the most literal sense.
So, okay, because this gets my brain firing off in all different directions, and absolutely like fascinating to hear about the Supreme or High Court decision in India in contrast and juxtaposition to our current context. Um, but I'm also thinking about like the real lived lives of gender diverse people. It's not a specific contemporary thing. Trans and gender diverse people haven't popped up. Like, they have been part of societies, communities, cultures, from my understanding, across time and space and history and culture. And I know you had an episode actually focused on that. And there's this weird, it feels like this weird thing that this is kind of like a distinctly English problem. And I say English there purposefully because, of the various situations around the UK, but also in the context of being part of a global community, and those those people and their experiences and lives being represented, as I say, across time, space, and culture.
I totally agree. Yeah, there are countless examples from around the world throughout history of gender diverse people existing. Um, and I My favorite, I think, is in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, which is in Mexico. It's in the narrowest part of Mexico between the Pacific Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico, not the Gulf of America. Uh, there's a community there that keeps thousand-year-old Zapotec traditions because they have managed to avoid the effects of colonialism. And what has happened there is they have, in modern day culture, a third gender known as mushe that exists in a kind of revered state in modern culture. And you have even there's a cool piece of work by Ramirez and Munar, which basically interviewed a bunch of mushe in Tehuantepec, and they asked them about their experiences, and they were saying like politicians will take on the words that are associated with them as a community, like intrepid and authentic. They take on those words deliberately to kind of piggyback on the back of their social acceptance, to try and demonstrate their own kind of to try and get elected. Can you imagine a politician? Can you imagine Keir Starmer saying, "Listen, yeah, I like to think that I'm like a trans person, authentic and intrepid in myself, in the hope that he'd get elected." Absolutely not. So, and there are countless examples of that where modern day cultural practices in like embrace a form of gender diversity in where they have managed to avoid the effects of colonialism. But there are countless examples around the world where colonialism has oppressed, obviously, indigenous cultural practices and gender diversity as a part of that act.
Mm.
Um, we left a toxic wake um, in our wake,
Wake.
a wake in our wake.
We left a toxic wake in
I
our
was so
wake.
close to really bringing it home with that one.
Yeah,
Uh,
just oh, just at
God,
the
it's
end.
just got away from me.
I'm gonna so I wanna like shift us slightly to thinking about the forthcoming publication of whatever they end up calling it, but I guess the let's go with the existing and working title of Gender Questioning Schools Guidance. I guess like listening to you talk and sort of reading about the way that these things have been constructed and the potential way that they'll be brought to the fore and to the public, um, I've got a sense of like the publication of these documents, in particular, if they go in a specific direction, there's a real risk of actually, and I think you said this in one of our preparatory chats, like de-skilling everyone in the room in
Yeah,
terms of how to support children and young people who might be going through these experiences.
I I I think you're right. I think with a gender questioning schools guidance that's gonna be released, I think I'd like people to imagine what it would be like for the government to release guidance that they described as neurodiversity questioning guidance, right? And release guidance that deliberately didn't describe children and young people as autistic or as having ADHD or even as neurodiverse. They describe them as questioning, and they position affirmative care, neurodiversity affirming practice as potentially encouraging children, young people to question their neurodiversity with the risk of making more people neurodivergent, and that being a bad thing, right? Implicitly a bad thing. Now, our response to that as a profession, I think, would be because I think we're on firmer footing as a profession around neurodiverse affirming practice. We know that is part of what we want to do because we know that helping people to find and be their authentic selves with pride in school and to find a world where they as their authentic selves can belong and can find an education system that serves their needs fully. That's what our agenda should be, and we're firm on that. And if the government were to release kind of neurodiverse questioning guidance like that challenged us on affirming practice, I wonder what our response would be. I think as a profession, our response might be to return to our ethical values, that we believe that children and young people have a right to affect proceedings that affect them, They have the right to self-determination and an inalienable right to be themselves in the world and to find a world that welcomes them as their authentic selves. When it comes to the gender questioning schools guidance, I think it feels more de-skilling. I think it feels more de-skilling because I think there is a stronger public sentiment about transgender people, and that gender diverse people could be a risk to children and young people because we could invite children and young people to question themselves. But the thing I want people to know is that the science isn't at all unclear on this. We did a systematic review on what gender identity is and how different measures of gender identity describe how it changes over time for children and young people. Um, Dr. Ellie Fisher, published that as a great piece of work. And what we have found and what the scientific community has found is that there is such a thing as gender diverse children and young people. It's not a choice. They're not, you know, it's not something that we have a great deal of control over any more than they do. It's a
Mhm.
journey of discovery, mostly, rather than a journey of creation, right? So I think if we return to our values and think about what we want the world to be like for these children and young people, then we can lead in this education system. We can make the world that we want to make for these kids, I think, in spite of whatever the government guidance says,
Yeah.
which is going to be pretty bad. I don't exactly know what it's going to say. I am not optimistic.
There was so much in there that like just and at the festival because we're doing this live we don't get the chance here to kind of expand and explore as we would if we were recording an episode, so I'm going to try and stay focused. But a couple of things that you talked about were, it really made me think that like often when we're talking about the ways to support children and young people, gender diverse children and young people, one of the arguments or counter arguments that seems to be surfacing or has surfaced multiple times is that there's just complete absence of evidence of what to do. And actually, I do listen to your podcast, and I do read in this area, and and that just doesn't seem true. There seems to be a good deal of international evidence about what it means to work with and support gender diverse and trans children and young people. So there's that reflection, but also one of the things that you talked about, for example, affirming practice, and I think like is that a naming issue? Because I think so often that gender affirming practice is kind of targeted as you're trying to make these children and young people trans or gender diverse. That's not how I would understand it. I would understand it as I'm meeting this child where they're at. I'm allowing space for them to develop their understanding of who they are. I'm not trying to make them either thing. It's about providing the security, the space, the understanding for them to arrive at a destination, not me doing anything, either way. So I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot there. What am I even asking you? Who knows?
There's a great deal of research about gender identity change efforts, and it's a good idea, I think, to position those against affirmative practice. Because I think the concept of affirmative care sounds like you're stepping ahead of people in some way. It's not what it is. Gender identity change efforts are any effort to shape somebody's gender identity in any way, right? And these are, they can be done by religious leaders, they can be done by clinicians, it can be done by parents, it can be done by the person themselves as they try not to be what they are or to make themselves something different. And I think the research is very clear that gender identity change efforts are universally harmful. So affirmative care must not tread into trying to make somebody trans, trying to encourage or discourage in any way. Affirmative care is simply about hearing someone right now. And when they tell us, and they often won't tell us directly, right? They're not, it's a rare thing that someone will say, "Hey, I think I might be trans to you." But rather they might leave the little breadcrumbs, the hints, the moments of testing the water, and how we receive those breadcrumbs what do we do with them? Like, that has considerable implications for what happens next. Do we respond to their testing the water with us with like with welcome, and we're like, we'll hear you, and when you tell
Mm,
us something, we'll believe you, and we'll make space for wherever you land on the gender spectrum right now to be in our practice, in our schools. um I think that's a beautiful thing, and
yeah.
I don't think you can do a lot of harm that way, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I'm struggling not to like, uh, not to go into a rant because you were talking about like,
Ready for it.
you know, gender change efforts, and I guess there's absolutely a narrative of, well, you know, that connected to this idea of gender affirming and care, that there are these people, these nefarious people out there trying to make trans and gender diverse children and young people, the foundation of which is we don't want children who are trans or gender diverse, or maybe we don't want people who are trans or gender diverse. But the notion to me seems ludicrous in that people who identify as gender diverse or trans have been subject to to a whole lifetime's and society's worth of cisgender norms, where there's this kind of very, very kind of strongly reinforced gender binary, and yet have still ended up as gender diverse and or trans. So
Totally.
this to me kind of blows my mind a bit, and maybe I'm just not even explaining it well, but there feels like an inherent kind of contradiction or kind of oxymoronic state there in that kind of argument.
I think you're right. I think even the literature, there's a cool study, I can't remember the authors, we reviewed it in an episode or two ago. A piece of work that was looking at the juxtaposed beliefs. Like you say, like on the one hand, people saying, well, children, young people, uh, that trans is such a rare thing, we shouldn't be pandering to such a small minority of people. Or at the same time saying, but it's it's also a tidal wave of transgender people. There's loads of them now. Look at how many. The numbers are increasing massively. And these juxtaposed beliefs that look at odds with each other, the research highlights that can be held by the same people, are
Right,
frequently held by the same people. And under the hood of that, the reason is because there is a higher order belief that supports them both. And the higher order belief is something along the lines of transgender people are unwelcome in society in some way.
right.
And there's other research that's really interesting that looked at, why people think they disagree with trans inclusive policies and practices, and what predicts their lack of support. And people tend to think that they're protecting women. That tends to be the most common reason that people are against transgender inclusive practice. And on the other hand, the thing that predicts their opposition is their distaste for the trans community. So I think under the hood of all of this, I think the beliefs that people hold, the fears that people hold, I think there's just a growing unease with gender diversity. I think there's been a strong, protracted media effort over 20 years to paint trans people as harmful and as a danger to your children, and
Where have we
to
heard
kind of
these before?
yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. For sure. For sure,
Yeah,
for
I
sure.
just yeah, I think anyone versed in the cultural or social history of uh, LGBT people, lesbian, gay, bisexual people from the 70s and 80s, they'll be pretty familiar narratives and arguments. So
Totally. Well, I mean, we had Section 28. For those who don't know, if you're not in the United Kingdom, share the references of that study, please. Zoe, great question. I will share. I will share my reference list, and you can always check out the podcast.
yeah,
Costume psychology. Yeah, with Section 28, for people who don't know, was Margaret Thatcher, Conservative government's a law that said that we must not promote the. Like, it prohibited the promotion of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. And Margaret Thatcher, to the Tory party conference in the 1980s, said all children who are being taught they have an inalienable right to be gay are being cheated of a sound start in life. Yes, cheated, she said to raucous applause. Yeah, that's where
Well,
we were in the
yeah,
1980s, right?
yeah.
And here we are now, essentially kind of saying something not dissimilar. And the gender questioning schools guidance may very well say we must not educate children, young people about gender diversity for fear that we
Mm.
might make them trans. Um, it's a
Hey,
dark
on that,
day.
I was going to say, on that positive note, should we like turn to the audience and see what they've got to say?
I've been seeing your messages coming in on the audience. You all are just incredible. I appreciate you so much. Do get your questions in the chat,
Shall
please,
I?
so that we can
Shall,
answer them.
shall I ask some?
Oh, go
Yeah.
for it, Dan. I'm ready.
Okay. Sadsida, firstly, I'm really sorry if I didn't say that correctly. Says, could you speak to the impact of gender binary supremacy on felt emotional safety of gender diverse children and EP's sort of moral principles of care in daily practice? So
Wow.
Sads is asking, how do we gather around these deeply emotionally vulnerable children, especially those who are multiply marginalized from a moral standpoint, not just legislative? Whoa.
Yes. Gosh, that's such a good question. Yeah, I mean, every so often someone will ask me about intersectional experiences, and I talk about, from an academic standpoint, the overlap and the sum of marginalization is greater than the sum of its parts, and that overlap. But then I had a situation yesterday where I was in my wheelchair. I'm a wheelchair user. I have MS, and I walk it up this 100 feet of hill at the end of my walk, and then I get back in it, and my legs are always done at that point. So I grunted, and as I was getting back in, and I saw this young guy across the street like look at me with a quizzical expression, and I suddenly struck me that I'd grunted in the wrong register. So I was like, as I saw him looking at me, like that's intersectionality, right? That's intersectional right there. Um, I think you are absolutely right. I think part of the problem with the supremacy of the binary model of gender is is fundamentally like Harry Piker writes about this in Nottingham. The fact that we still assign children one of two genders at birth, male or female, and we have no level of provisionality to that assignment, even though we know we get it wrong. Just for the gender diverse community, like 0.5% of the time. So that's one in every 200 children. We get that assignment wrong, and yet we still don't have any level of provisionality. And that follows kids throughout school. This kind of, we still have boys' schools and girls' schools. We still have boys and girls' school uniforms. We still line boys and girls up or sit boy, girl, boy, girl. There's a bunch of different examples that children experience of the reinforcement of the gender binary as if it's truth
Mm,
and as if it's normal and healthy. And that the implication then is that, if you are not, then you are not.
yeah.
Um,
And I'm seeing in the chat as well, like Adam comments, and I think this is so relevant about like this not seen in isolation. And Adam says how it's a phenomenon of the last decade or so where we've seen heavy pushback on LGBTQ plus rights holistically,
yeah,
not
definitely.
just specifically. There's been perhaps an inordinate focus on trans and gender diverse people, but LGBTQ plus rights holistically, and highlights that the UK used to be top of the ILGA Europe Rainbow Index on equality, but
Yes.
has plummeted to 22nd out of 49 in the
And as
latest
we start to
index.
approach Romania and Hungary and, uh, you know, like, and Russia's not too far below that. And it's absolutely terrifying. That slip has been terrifying to witness. It's terrifying right now. I really worry about the situation right now for young people because, what hope do you have, right? When the Labour government, I mean, political for a second, Labour government was supposed to be, they're supposed to be the party of, they're supposed to be the people that we vote for, right? Gender diverse
Mm,
people vote left because liberal parties tend to protect our rights. And the Labour government has historically been a proponent of trans rights, particularly 15 years ago. It was a beautiful time to be trans. It was almost a positive thing to be trans in this country, almost 15 years ago. And now, as Sean Fay writes, you know, passing for cis, hiding in plain sight, has got a premium not unlike the 1960s.
Mm.
where hiding in plain sight has become the only way to survive. And so children, young people don't see trans people because being visible is so risky for us that we don't tell them we're trans. We don't be
Yeah.
visibly trans. And then it just reinforces both I can't see a place for myself. I can't imagine what my world would be like because policies exclude me and because my people, the people who look like me, who are like me in the world in how they are in the world, are less visible to me.
Mm. Yeah.
I think it all feeds into that marginalization.
So, I mean, there's some great questions coming through, and I'm yeah. As you've been talking, I've been thinking about whether to say this, and I will say it. And some of the for listeners, they won't be able to see this. Some of the questions coming through are anonymous, and I can fully understand why. I can fully understand why some of our listeners, like, would some of the attendees at the festival would want to ask some of these questions anonymously, given the context. So, one, for example, says, "I'm grappling with the challenge of being an LAEP, wanting to loudly do the work of supporting schools, children, and families to navigate being inclusive to gender diverse children, while also wanting to do this quietly because I don't want to be stopped by the political leadership. Do you have any words of wisdom for walking that line?"
Yeah, I think that is an incredible question. Thanks so much for asking it. And I've been grappling with the same thing. I often, when I do this kind of work in schools, which has happened more sparsely these days, I do get a couple of schools ask me to come in and do some work, but it used to happen a lot more. I think schools are nervous too. And schools will ask me, how do I, or I go and do trainings in EP services, and EPs will often ask me, how do I do this without getting sued or without, you know, um, without transgressing a line which will put me at risk of complaint. And to my mind, the way that I have managed that in my own practice when I'm out in schools doing this kind of work is to say, I am not a lawyer. I can't speak to the law. I encourage people to seek legal advice of their own. The Good Law Project is a perfect place to start. But I am a psychologist. And while the law is confusing right now and uncertain, and we don't know what's going to happen, the psychology is not all that unclear. The
Mm.
science of psychology is pretty clear about how we make a world where these kids can thrive. And so I advise people on the science of psychology, on good, sound application of good, sound psychological science. This we've got a massive global scientific community all working together, trying to kind of understand who gender diverse people are and how to help them to thrive in school. And that body of literature is now strong enough that we can be pretty confident that, you know, this kind of
Yeah.
affirmative model of practice, which simply makes room for these young people to exist. That's
Do you-
it's a good
the
thing.
Yeah, that is a good thing. And Adam posts here as well, like, it's worth remembering that 100,000 people marched in London Trans Pride just a month ago. And there are many more supporters and allies than we sometimes think. And it is a great time for them to stand up and speak. And, like, here, like, absolutely. I think so. I know that we're, like, at our time for this. But what I wonder about doing is that in another episode of the Educated Guess, that we've got some of these questions from the audience that, like, maybe we come back to this and explore in more depth. Are you up for that?
I am always up for that, Dan. You and like, getting the opportunity to spend some more time with you, talking to an extraordinary group of people. This is an incredible privilege. The opportunity for us to do it in another episode of the podcast. I will always jump at the chance.
So I'm going to save these questions that we've got because we've got some fab questions that have come through. And, it might feel like a weird crossover of like the Educated Guess and classroom psychology. But so what? Like, that means you just get to be in two places at one time, actually. So it's, yeah, I think we should come back to this. We'll save these Q&As. Do you know what? I loved listening to you. Thank you so much. Like, thanks for joining. And also, like, how cool. Just as part of our day, we've now just recorded another episode. Great.
I mean, it was so good. I mean, it genuinely is always an extraordinary privilege. And I think the note to leave on is that I think you are right that people are, generally speaking, really good. They want the best for children, and sometimes maybe they think that the best thing for children is to not learn about trans people. I kind of get it. Their motivation is still they want the best for children, young people. And and I don't think that the world is as conflicted as it might appear. Like the algorithms feed us a lot of conflict and disagreement and dissonance. And when we all come together here, I think what we realize is that actually, as we are one community, and together we can make a world where everyone can
Everyone.
find a place to belong.
Thank you, Cora. Thank you to our festival attendees, and thank you, listener, as well. This has been a special edition, although we've only just started, of the Educated Guest podcast, and we can't wait to welcome you to another episode. Wow. Okay, we've slightly run over, so small comfort break, because I know the next sessions are starting in 3 minutes in the session space. Cora, thank you for your time,
Deepest
and I will
apologies.
see you soon.